The war in Gaza will send hundreds of thousands of people into poverty. That's the bleak assessment by the United Nations. After years of Israeli blockades, the economic situation has gone from bad to catastrophic. Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, Gaza was barely scraping by, relying heavily on international aid. Nearly 2 months of war has had a devastating impact.
To date, it's the most economically costly conflict in modern history. The output lost in Palestine dwarfs losses caused by the wars in Syria and Ukraine by nearly 4 times. The first month of fighting caused a 20% increase in poverty. That's in a country with a poverty level of $6 a day, and nearly 2/3 of those employees lost their jobs in October alone.
For the epicenter, it is devastating. The economy of Gaza is devastated. West Bank is severely impacted.
The reality is the situation had declined considerably after the Israeli blockade started in 2007. Israel controlled goods coming in and out of the territory, as well as Gazans' access to electricity and water. Before the war, only 31% of energy needs were met. Up to 35% of agriculture and 85% of fishing were affected by Israeli restrictions, and more than 1 million people received UNRWA food assistance compared to only 80,000 in the year 2000. At the time, the World Bank called the outlook bleak, and now it's worse.
What is being destroyed is the stock of capital. I mean, it's buildings, it's hospitals. It's very difficult to make a proper assessment until things stop. But it's going to be in the billions of dollars. But that there's no doubt. It's going to be in the tens of billions of dollars.
It seems obvious, but the longer the war goes on, the more damage to the economy. When the fighting stops, what, if anything, will be left?
Well, let's meet our guests in Jenin, in the occupied West Bank. We have Nasser Abufarha. He's a social entrepreneur and founder of Canaan, Palestine. That's a supplier of organic and fair trade produce. In Geneva, we have Rami AlAzzeh. He is economist at UNCTAD. That's the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which promotes the interests of developing countries in world trade. In Birzeit, in the occupied West Bank, we have Yousef Daoud, Professor of Economics at Birzeit University. And in Amman, Abbas Milhem, he is Executive Director of the Palestinian Farmers Union. A very warm welcome to Roundtable to all of you. Rami, first of all, we saw in May of this year, the World Bank said that the outlook for the Palestinian economy was bleak. Where on earth is it now?
Well, to start with, I think the context before the 7th of October is very important to understand. So in the latest report of UNCTAD in 2023, we looked at the Palestinian economy until the first half of 2023. The outlook before the current escalations was actually bleak. In the West Bank, the expected growth was very, very, very mild. And in Gaza, the first half of 2023, there was a contraction of 4%, 1.5%. In Gaza, it's even worse in terms of the dire socioeconomic conditions. 45% of the labor force was unemployed. 80% of the population in Gaza were dependent on aid, and the prospect for the economy in the OPT was bleak, and there is no end of this cycle of destruction and reconstruction in Gaza. And now it's even much worse. We're expecting the economy of the OPT to contract dramatically in 2023, leading to further poverty, higher unemployment, and the damages that happened so far in Gaza are really catastrophic. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is getting bigger and bigger, but always we have to remember that the root cause of this of this issue is not humanitarian. It's actually a political cause. The lack of political horizon actually impacted the Palestinian economy for the past decades. And looking forward, I think the situation, if there's no political situation, there's no political solution, will actually get worse.
Agriculture is hugely important to the Palestine economy, Abbas, isn't it? How difficult, even before the war, how difficult does this Israeli administration make it for Palestinian farmers?
Thank you, and warm greetings to all the guests you have around this table. But in order to understand that, let's go back to the middle of 70s when agriculture sector in Palestine used to contribute by 35% of the GDP of Palestine. But due to the land grabbing, land shrinking, and land confiscation, land annexation done by the Israeli occupation for the purpose of expanding the settlements and deploying new settlers from mid-70s until now agriculture sector in Palestine contribute only by less than 4% to the GDP compared to the 35% in the middle of 70s. And this gives a clear picture of how policies of the Israeli occupation is focusing on stealing the land, emptying the land from farmers, destroying the entire agricultural production, and annex the entire food security in Palestine to be totally dependent on the Israeli one. And now, from the beginning of this war, and even before that, from when this recent government was established, which is described and perceived as the most extremist government in the history of Israel, where for the first time there are settler leaders who are ministers in this government. One of them is the Minister of Finance, and he is in charge of financing and supporting the expansion of settlement by controlling, confiscating, annexing more farmlands from farmers for the benefit of settlement expansion, who is Smotrich. And the other minister, who is a settler leader, Ben-Gvir, he is in charge of the national security, who's providing full political support and backing up of settlers to cover their attacks against Palestinians, farmers mainly in West Bank. From October 7 until the end of October, PFU, the Palestinian Farmers Union, have reported and documented 334 attacks against Palestinian farmers. And these attacks were in different forms. First, physical attacks on farmers, which resulted in injuries, beaten, and even shoot to kill, like what happened with the olive farmer in Assawi town between Ramallah and Nablus, who was shot dead while he was harvesting his olive season. Second type of attacks against farmers was kicking them and forcing them to leave their farmlands and their residential areas in an area classified as Area C in Jordan Valley and in Masafir Yatta, south of Hebron area. And those two areas are the strategic storage for animal production. 1,000 families were kicked out of their farmlands as livestock farmers. And the third type is preventing and restricting farmers from accessing their olive and their agriculture areas, like what happened during this olive season. As you know, when the war erupted on October 7, we were about to start the annual olive harvest season in Palestine. To the increasing settler violence and attacks against farmers, 50% of olive farmers in Palestine this year were unable to harvest and pick up their olives this year, which created a huge loss.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you. I want to bring in Nasser. Nasser, I read something recently that I just could not believe, I could not fathom. The Israeli government claims ownership of the rain that falls on Palestinian land. Is that correct?
That is correct. In their books, farmers are not allowed to create dams to trap the water to stay in the land or divert any stream that is coming towards their land to pass through their land. And not only that, for Area C, which is 62% of all of the West Bank, farmers literally are not allowed to do any farming activities without permission. Even a mere transportation of water pipes is illegal in the eyes of the law.
Well, the violence and the conflict in Gaza has coincided with the olive harvest, as Abbas was telling us about. It's a lifeline for many families. Some farmers even used the calm of that truce to return to their olive groves. The olive oil industry makes up 25% of the agricultural income in Palestine. 80 to 100,000 families across the Palestinian territories rely on the olive harvest. But in the West Bank, farmers have faced more restrictions from Israeli forces and more frequent settler attacks. The Palestinian Ministry of Health says that more than 230 Palestinians have been killed and about 2,850 others injured by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank since October the 7th. Rami, it's extraordinary, the resilience of the Palestinian people to keep going despite these obstacles that are placed in their way by the Israeli machine.
True. The Palestinians learned how to adapt from all the multi-layered restrictions imposed by the occupying power in the West Bank, in Gaza. Palestinian people are very creative in knowing how to adapt, but also there is a limit to that. The Israelis, they enforce a lot of restrictions on Palestinians in terms of trade, in terms of movement and access, and for Palestinians also this has created a dependency for the past 3 decades after the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian resilience is impressive always, but there is a limit to where the Palestinians can actually be creative given all the restrictions imposed of them. As the colleagues already mentioned, there's now the olive harvest, and the settler violence and the occupation restrictions impose a lot of challenge for Palestinians in different sectors. As Dr. Yousef Daoud said, it's basically now in a span of 1 week, Palestinians, 25% of the labor force in the West Bank lost their jobs. And instead of having a 13.4% unemployment in the West Bank, now it's around 38%. And this is what at UNCTAD we kept saying, that this dependency creates volatility for the Palestinian economy, and there's inability for the Palestinian economy to handle shocks, because every aspect of the Palestinian economy is sieged by the occupation, whether it's labor, monetary, the fiscal, as Dr. Yousef Daoud said. The Israelis, they use the Palestinian rightful revenues collected as a political tool. They withhold them, they deduct from them unilaterally, and it's 2/3 of the Palestinian government's revenues. And since November 2021, actually, the Palestinian government was not able to pay full salaries. And since October of 2023, the Palestinian government did not pay any of the salaries for the Palestinian public sector. So there's a lot of dependency on the occupying power in different aspects. And for that, the Palestinian resilience, or the Palestinian economic resilience as well, is limited.
Yousef, this is almost a psychological weapon that's being deployed against the Palestinian people, isn't it? To stop people even the basic right to go to work, to earn, to farm the land. It's a form of repression completely, isn't it?
It's a paramilitary situation. They're not military, they're not just civilians, but they are very protected by the Israeli army. So the Israeli army is there imposing checkpoints almost at every intersection near a settlement or close to a settlement. And that delays people. I live by a checkpoint and I see it every day. That delays people 1 to 2 hours to go from one small place to another, which raises the transaction cost of doing business. If you cannot do agriculture, if you cannot transport things, if there is no free movement of goods and services, that makes your goods and services much more uncompetitive, and therefore you cannot really trade with other partners. Things become very costly. In addition to that, the settlement itself was made in order to make it impossible for a political settlement. How can you get rid of 600,000 settlers in the West Bank to do some two-state solution, which is a dead idea anyway. I think the way forward should be the one-state solution. It took the Americans 150 years to give the Red Indians their citizenship. When will Israel believe that this is a foregone conclusion? Eventually, they have to do this because the two-state solution is an empirical impossibility.
Nasser, a lot of people will be watching this and reeling in horror, really, at what is being inflicted on the Palestinian people, this kind of economic war as well. Tell us about your initiative and how anyone watching can help if they want to get involved.
Canaan, Palestine was founded to establish route to market for Palestinian family farmers through fair trade and organic. And of course, the market for fair trade or organic is mostly in the industrialized north. So we have a network of farmers that are organized in various villages, about 54 villages across the West Bank. As my colleague said, I mean, this year's harvest is naturally low yield, but with settler violence and restriction by the Israeli army to access the land, they are like informing village councils of large parcels of lands that farmers are not allowed to go harvest this year. And those who try, they are being threatened to be shot by the army and the settlers or settlers protected by army. So what normally Palestinian harvest is about 30,000 tons. We probably are not getting as much as 10,000 tons this year of olive oil. 5,000 tons could have been harvested if farmers had access to the lands that are near settlements or near the wall. Our company has olive oil in Europe and North America. Our website is canaanpalestine.com. We have a shopping cart that mainly in the US, but also ships to Europe and around the world. This olive oil comes from Jenin, packed in Jenin, but it is primarily sourced from Ramallah, Salfit, Qalqiliyah, Tulkarim, Jenin, and Nablus region throughout the West Bank. And that's the exchange between farmers and international buyers is very meaningful, and people have been pouring support for our farmers in this impasse during the war.
Thank you, Nasser. Abbas, how important is that international support? I mean, there will be people watching around the world who, hand on heart, would buy Palestinian goods in shops and supermarkets in their own countries if they could see them.
International support is very important and crucial for Palestinians. But before we would request from international to buy the goods of Palestinians, we want the pressure to be imposed on the Israeli occupying power and settlers to stop their violence against Palestinians and end this occupation, which will be the core solution for the entire conflict in Palestine. And we have been in the Union requesting and conducting international influencing campaigns, calling for international community to start doing things rather than talking about things. Words will not solve the problem. Actions are needed in order to cornerize settlers and the Israeli occupiers, to stop their attacks against Palestinian farming. The aim that we witness and experience on daily basis by all our farmers in entire West Bank and even in Gaza before is to make farming practices and life of farmers almost impossible, so they leave their lands easy, hunt for confiscation and for settlement expansion. The only thing that will make settlers think 10 times before they commit their crimes is to hold them accountable by international pressure on them. I don't understand why settlement produce is still being marketed in European market and in this international market, although it was produced in a legally occupied land, irrigated by water resources stolen from Palestinians, but until now it can be marketed in Europe. Those settlers need to pay the price of being settlers, and this can be done by international pressure, not by words, but through actions.
Yousef, just tell me how determined people are going into 2024 to turn this around, to keep going. Tell me how the Palestinian resilience will shine through in the new year, regardless of what happens.
Well, now we have a track record of facing those perpetual conflicts that happen every now and then. You know, Gaza still has not recovered from the 2014 operation. Yes, a lot of their housing units, have not been rebuilt, but some countries have helped by building a lot of buildings for the people. But still, you ask the Gaza people now, they tell you, we're not leaving, we're staying here, we are with the resistance, because this is our place of birth, this is our land. We are determined to stay, we are determined to do everything we can. As a matter of fact, during the second Intifada, we were teaching courses in areas where we could hear gunfire outside the window. So this is, I just sometimes don't understand the Israeli psychology. There is something called equilibrium in economics. Whenever there is this equilibrium, somebody is not happy and they're going to do something about it. And so they should somehow come to their senses and stop the war in Gaza and come to a peaceful solution. This perpetual violence is not going to help anybody. It will continue to happen. And they're not a magnificent army as they show. They can't be beaten. Eventually, something is going to happen very bad to them until they come to their senses. They better do it now.
Rami, looking ahead, how long do you think it will take, in all honesty, for the Palestinian economy to recover from what we've seen? 2 months of war. I saw one prediction that 3 full months of conflict will cost the Palestinian economy $2.5 billion.
Gazan economy had, in 16 years, grew by 1%. 1% is the worst economic performance in the world in the past 16 years. And the 2014 war, which was the damages were less severe than the first month of the current Israeli operations in Gaza, was actually, the estimates were $3.9 billion. And I think when it comes to Gaza now, we're looking at cost that comes from 4 main channels. One is basically the damages themselves, the damages to assets, private assets, public assets, infrastructure. And then this is, given the level of destruction this time, it's actually going to be in the billions of dollars. Add to that the loss of the GDP and change in the trend of what was predicted for Gaza before. And it's this basically, given that it started on October 7th, we're predicting that the last quarter of 2023 will not actually have any economic activity, given Israelis actually sieged the whole of Gaza in terms of food, electricity, water, fuel. And then the last bit is the recovery of Gaza. The recovery of Gaza, the thing is that, what is the benchmark? Is it before October 7th? Because this is not a place where anybody will go back to. Is it 2006, before the blockade started on Gaza, which also wasn't so great, where poverty in Gaza was at 37%. Prosperity in Gaza, I think this is why in the beginning I mentioned that a political solution needs to happen where the blockade is lifted on Gaza. Big infrastructure projects to allow development in Gaza, because for the past 16 years, Gaza is outside the development agenda and it's rendered as a humanitarian case, even before the current crisis. The recovery in Gaza will take tens of billions of dollars and many, many years for it to just go back to where it was before October 7th, and which is not actually a great place, and even more years for it to go back to 2006, just before the blockade. And after 7 rounds of destruction and military operations of the Israelis, the Gazan population has been much poorer. And just before the escalations in 2022, the Gazan population were 27% poorer than 2006, before the blockade started. So in terms of looking ahead, the only way for Gaza to actually go back to the development agenda is for donors to stay the course, the recovery actually to be a full recovery of Gaza, and not like the vicious circle that we've seen in the past 16 years of insufficient reconstruction after every military operation, where you have a bit of momentum, but then this momentum is lost. And it needs to be, we need to build back Gaza better, in the sense that we need to have access to electricity for all the citizens in Gaza, access to clean water, the infrastructure to be rebuilt, hospitals, schools, that were destructed in the current escalations. So for Gaza, it will really need political will from the international community, plus financial support, plus time for it to be fully recovered. It's not time now to go back to insufficient recovery. It's now time to build back better for the people in Gaza to have hope, which they lost for the past 16 years.
Thank you, Rami, Nasser, Yousef, and Abbas. Thank you all so much. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.